American composer John Cage sometimes let dice decide what a composition should look like, and in 1960 he shocked viewers of a popular TV show with his water walk, in which he turned a bathtub, various household appliances, flower vases, and so on into musical instruments. When asked by the host why the work was called Water Walk, he gave a surprisingly sober answer. "We don't want to keep this from you, but first we would like to offer a few thoughts on the interpretation of another work by Cage in the German city of Halberstadt, which the composer might have liked." In 1987, Cage wrote a piano piece for the Friends of the Maryland Summer Institute for the Creative and Performing Arts using random processes. He called it As Slow as Possible, and it was to be played, surprise, surprise, as slowly and gently as possible. He also referred to a passage from James Joyce's cryptic novel Finnegan's Wake, Soft Morning City. LSP. I am leafy spiefing. LPF. Folty and folty all the nights have falled on to long my hair. Not a sound falling. Lispin. No wind, no word. Cage also arranged the work for organ when he wrote it, and in 1997, 10 years later, organists and music theorists racked their brains over how the piece should be performed correctly. Finally, they decided to take a radical approach to the title and initiate a performance that would last a full 639 years. The venue for the performance is a church in Halberstadt, which was last used as a barn, shed, distillery, and pigsty. The organ on which As Slow as Possible is to be played during the 639 years is being built on the fly, so to speak. Only when the score requires a new note is it added to the instrument. At present, the room contains a small rudimentary instrument consisting of a few organ pipes, including a manual. And since no organist is willing to press the keys for years on end, the keys that produce the notes are weighted down with small sandbags. The radically stretched performance is also a testimony to how human perception is completely dismantled. No one will be able to grasp the work as a whole. In fact, visitors to the church can only hear microscopic excerpts in the form of sustained notes, which give ordinary mortals no impression of the whole. This radical interpretation gives pause for thought. One might ask, for example, what exactly has been slowed down in the Halberstadt performance? For example, there is a highly interesting discrepancy between articulation and tempo when the massively stretched notes are switched on and off at normal speed. An interpreter who plays a piece very slowly would make note changes more significant, for example with sophisticated portamenti or the leisurely blossoming of a note. If this were the case in Halberstadt, then the extension of As Slow as Possible to 639 years would not be seen as an extension of the form in the usual sense, but rather as a kind of zooming in on a kind of Gulliver music in the dwarf land of humans. Transitions from one tone to another would then have to be enlarged in their stretched state, viewed under a magnifying glass, so to speak, and be of a tremendous impact, announcing themselves months before the eventual tipping point. And the internal structures of the tones would also have to be inflated. Small fluctuations in the air supply would lead to gigantic tonal instabilities. In the case of the organ, too, one would have to listen to microstructures related to natural fluctuations in the air supply. The musical meaning presents another puzzle. Music that is not heard is nonsense per se. This is because musical wholeness always arises in the mind of the listener. Seen in this light, the Halberstadt version of As Slow as Possible is not a piece of music, but a sequence of organ tones strung together and sounding simultaneously. The project could therefore only be made musically productive if the entire piece were recorded. Technically, this would be entirely achievable. 639 years of music in one piece would require around 350 terabytes of storage space based on current technology. Once the last note of the piece had finally faded away, the really exciting part of the project would begin, namely the condensation of time, the playback of the recording in extreme fast forward. If the recording were played back at approximately 67 million times the normal speed in the year 2639, in 5 minutes one would hear the abridged version of 639 years of auditory event history and the audible manifestation of a structure. What would John Cage have said about this? He would probably have commented on the undertaking rather laconically, just as he had explained the title Water Walk to television audiences in 1960. The piece is called that, he said, because it contains water and because he walks during its performance. Quite obvious. If you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel. At academia-larty.org, you will also find a knowledge database and online courses from our academy. And check out the other videos here on YouTube. Thank you for your interest.